Very good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Gaia Education Glocalisers webinar series. My name is Giovanni Charlo. I'm the academic and e-learning coordinator at Gaia Education. I'm very excited to bring you this webinar on regenerative design and development, transforming the ways humans inhabit the world. This webinar series is offered to build capacity in systems thinking and design. Some household tips before we start, some housekeeping tips. The webinar will be recorded and is made available on our YouTube channel for those who cannot attend live. So if you miss any part of it, you can still watch it later. Everybody that registered will receive a link to that recording. Please close any open programs that you don't need at this time to have better bandwidth and to not interfere with the webinar. It usually works best if we have other programs turned off or closed down. Your microphone will be muted during the webinar, but you can communicate with your host via the chat box at the bottom of your Fuse application. If you are joining us online, I'm not sure on your browser where you can find the chat, but I believe you also have access to the chat box, and we will use the chat to communicate with the host and to post questions after the webinar. After the presentation, you will be invited to ask the presenter any lingering questions that you may have, so try to save those for the end. There won't be very much room during the presentation for back and forth. And please post your questions and comments in the chat area at the bottom of your Fuse application. I also want to point out other resources that Gaia Education has made available on our website, such as the EDE curriculum, the activity guides, teacher's manuals, the 4 keys, and some new publications that are not yet on this slide, but you can find them by going to the GaiaEducation.org shop books. You also will find there the Sustainable Development Goals flashcards developed by Gaia Education. They are now translated into several languages. I can't remember how many, but 5 or 6 different languages. And you will also have available the Trainers of Multipliers handbook that you see here at this website. And you can download that for free in black and white. You can also purchase the same document in color. These are used for having meaningful conversations and discussions with our communities and organizations regarding the Sustainable Development goals. You are also invited to check out our online courses offered on a yearly cycle in 3 languages. The year-long courses are divided into each dimension of design, and they are offered in English, Portuguese, and soon in Spanish as well. You can find out more about Gaia Education through our social media, and you can learn how to become a Gaia Education certified trainer, like the growing list of trainers on our roster. There are some specifics about how to become a certified trainer, and you can see that in our web pages as well. For today's webinar, I have the great honor to introduce Peter Gringinger. Peter is a certified trainer with Gaia Education and also a certified environmental practitioner in Australia and New Zealand. He's a registered professional geoscientist and works as a radical evolutionary activist and change agent through the use of whole systems, transition, and regenerative design to provide support through integral and participatory facilitation to co-create and co-design sustainable futures of regenerative and thriving local cultures. Peter has been originally trained as a geologist and hydrogeologist, and over the years has completed advanced training and degrees in renewable energy systems, various fields of environmental sciences, engineering, and sustainability. He has gained extensive experience in many environments, projects, and contexts, working and living in 8 countries on 3 different continents. So, welcome, Peter. And there he is. Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Gio, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to another Glocalizer webinar. I'm really pleased being invited to stage this seminar, and I really would like to get right into the presentation about regenerative design and development. So I think you should see all the first slide here, and I want to share some ideas, which most of them are place-based. Seemingly, do we have some issues with, I think, getting the right slideshow?
Try the other file, Peter. That's the wrong show, yeah.
Okay.
That's the one I just used.
Okay. Always the difficulty is two slideshows with almost the same name.
Here, I'll put it up for you. There we go.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Well, let's go into it. So what I'm talking about is regenerative design and development. Probably a lot of people in here might have heard a lot about regeneration in the past, or at least the term regeneration. Okay, I have to go back to the start. It starts moving around a little. I'm not sure what's happening here. The slideshow is advancing by itself. Anyway, so I just really want to give a short introduction on regeneration and what it means or might mean. I have a different background to other people as well, and coming more from a place-based development kind of idea. Introduce the concepts of regenerative design, and then we'll focus a little bit on a few case studies, which are place-based developments, and then a bit of a wrap. Talk about some of the resources available, and then we have hopefully a little bit of time to answer some questions. So let's get going. So I really want to start with a quote from Daniel Christian Weil, which maybe quite a few of you are familiar with. He's also doing work for Gaia Education. He, for example, developed the SDG flashcards and many other kind of things, and he's heavily involved in the regenerative design space, including doing a lot of research and publishing a book a couple of years ago on creating regenerative cultures. Just want to really read out the second part of this quote. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment were relatively minor variations on an already existing theme in comparison to the transformation that is now underway. The birth of regenerative cultures and a regenerative human civilization is the most profound transformative innovation that our species has undergone since we started to turn from nomadic hunters and gatherers into settled agriculturalists some 8,000 to 5,000 years ago. So it's really a big task, or a huge time of transition we are going through at the moment, and of course it causes disorientation and causes to search for new approaches how we are on this planet and how we relate to the planet and how we make our living here. In any case, going into regenerative design, a few definitions which I use and some people I'm associated with use. I mean, it's not the only definition, of course. I mean, as well. It's a process-oriented and systems theory-based approach to design, and the term regenerative describes a process which is about restoring, renewing, and revitalizing their own sources of energy, materials, and creating with it sustainable systems that integrate the needs of society with the needs of nature. Then regenerative development, the other term I was bringing up in my title as well, is working to reverse the degeneration of ecosystems through harmonizing human activities with the continuing evolution of life on our planet, starting from place, each individual place, learning the story of a place, and working with potential as opposed what we're doing nowadays most of the time, working on problems, but working with the potential of a place. It doesn't necessarily have to be a place, but it can be a group of people, a community, an organization as well, and taking the next leap into regenerative development. And it starts from thinking about that all human activities have the potential to feed new life, health and wealth into a lot of ecological and social systems that we influence. For doing that, it is very important that we understand the unique socio-ecological context that we operate in, that we do projects in, so that we can impact this in a positive way rather than applying generic one-size-fits-all thinking to our work. So it has to be very place-based and has to be unique out of the context, the work we're doing. In that way, regenerative design attempts to redevelop or recenter a place unique identity, and hopefully also the health and future prosperity out of that design thinking. It's a process which can be applied to cities, towns, bioregions, human organizations of any kind of groups of whatever type they might be. So it is important to see them that they can be become life-giving and be realigned with ecological systems as well. A lot of words and of course concepts which are not necessarily always that easy to understand, but bringing it down to a few words, regenerate means to restore a better, higher state, a renewal or restoration of living systems after injury, or much better is a normal process. And regenerative development, in a few words, is the process of cultivating the capacity and capability in people, communities, and other natural systems to renew, adapt, and thrive. So I will repeat a lot of these kind of terms over and over again in various different contexts. So, foundations of regenerative design coming from various different ideas, concepts, belief systems, and philosophies. One of them, and I only will skim through a few of them, not really talking about, is what most of you might be familiar with, the design system. Gaia Education is using the mandala, which is shown here. And other people have been developing similar kind of or equivalent kind of concepts as well to really look at issues and problems we are facing in a more holistic approach. Background is also in system theory and thinking, which I already mentioned. Another background is in complexity theory, which we particularly nowadays we're looking at very complex or sometimes called wicked problems. And also what we need to think about is what kind of intervention points we are seeking to address. And regenerative design is really trying to shift the paradigm in place-based development. Fractal theory and non-linear dynamics, ecological theory, which is all these kind of concepts are interlinked with each other and used in different ways. Permaculture as a systems-based design approach, of course, as well, is very prominent in regenerative design. Biomimicry, using nature's design examples for our human problems in many different ways, but not least also regenerative design also uses more human developmental or consciousness evolution approaches, integral theory, practice, and spiral dynamics as well. So to think about a bit more clearly about the different terminology between sustainability. You might have heard a lot recently about resilient systems and then also regenerative systems. There's quite a bit of a difference there. And it's important to understand that a regenerative approach tries to optimize the viability through a renewal process and to really to achieve abundance, be it in ecosystems, be it in human and social systems. A resilient approach is more about the incorporation of flexible elements to quickly adapt to change, which is something which is happening to us at the moment. So you still have to be resilient. All these concepts go all together, so one is not at the exclusion of the other either. And a sustainable approach aims to maintain a system over a long period of time, something we really want to achieve as well anyway. So, and one of the practitioners in regenerative design, Bill Reed from the Regenesis group, who has been working in that field for the last few decades, has developed the kind of graph. On the left-hand side is where we are still at the moment, having degenerative systems, and then moving up in our design process through a green design process like sustainable buildings, then maybe sustainable as such, which we are trying to maintain as status quo, even it's questionable what kind of status quo we are actually trying to maintain, and then moving through the regeneration into, or through restoration, resilience, and into regenerative design. I'll come back to that in a minute. In simple terms, we can put it in a way, particularly when we talk about place-based systems, it is very often that a lot of places are very poorly designed and poorly used. They're not very inviting places where people want to be and want to be. On the other hand, we have an epidemic of loneliness and disconnection. Disconnection also from nature, disconnection from people, from each other as well. And a lot of the rules and regulations don't really help the case to overcome these issues either. And it's, in simple terms, quite clear what we like. A lot of people would like to get is much deeper connections where we can thrive and where we can also connect to nature. And I want to really give you a few different perspectives on that by sharing a short video on the concept, and hopefully it makes things a little bit.
Can't hear the audio, Peter.
Oh. Does it work now?
No. Do you hear it?
Okay. Okay. It doesn't work.
No.
Doesn't work.
It's not working at the moment. Let me see.
Okay.
Let me see if I can do that. Maybe it'll work. Oh, now it is.
Oh, should I repeat it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's actually very bad audio, so I'm not sure. No, it's not. It's not coming across very well. Let me try sharing it myself. Maybe it'll come across a little bit better on my screen.
Okay.
Sustainable design to restorative design, which means reforesting, creating ecosystems, but it's still the mindset of man over nature. So the next step on that is reconciliatory design.
I'm sorry. There we go.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, then we can just move on as well.
I think, let me see. No, yeah, let's move on. Maybe the next one will do better.
Yeah, okay. If you put up the next one in advance, then
yeah.
Okay. Well, sorry for that. I'll come back to my presentation now. Some technical glitches. Okay, no, I can't see. Let me see. Oh, I can't see the slides now.
Hold on. Did you? Yeah. Did you stop sharing your screen?
Ah, that's it. All right. Okay, sorry. We're back on track. So basically, it was just another few words about what regenerative design is about in explaining Bill Reed's kind of concept of moving from sustainability via restoration into regeneration. But another part of it is when we think about it, regeneration has to take place at a lot of different scales. And that graph, I'm not sure how well it's coming through, is actually from Daniel's book as well, where we need to look at regenerative design from the molecular level of what is sometimes called green chemistry, all the way through things like products and artifacts, into building design, into community design, into city design, into bioregional design or bigger. So in all these kind of levels, we have to work. And of course, they're all deeply interlinked as well. So makes it, of course, quite a complex undertaking. Just briefly to talk about the regenerative concept is nothing particularly new. It's being used in agriculture, particularly a lot of people in permaculture have been using these kind of ideas and concepts for a while to regenerate ecological systems at the same time for human survival and thriving as well. Regenerative buildings, of course, are a mainstay of what I will be concentrating as well, but also regenerative communities, and that's where Gaia Education, of course, comes from, and eco-village design education is an important part, but it can be expanded into regenerative cities, in particular thinking about cities as organisms which are able to regenerate in a sense to become circular systems, so that they regenerate energies and materials and everything else as well. Goes into enterprises. Some of you might have heard of 8 forms of capital, which not only looks at financial issues and systems, but really expanding it into a much more holistic and in some sense more realistic view of what economy is about. And that brings me regenerative economy, expanding into various other themes of our economic work as well. So let's try it another time with another video, which is another explanation of regenerative design by Daniel. So it can work. How do you go? Still working on it. Oh, here we go. No, can't hear that. Okay.
I got it.
Yeah,
here we go.
Of enabling people in place to create healthy, whole, resilient socio-ecological systems through working on collaborative abundance rather than competitive scarcity. It is about working with the latent potential in each place to work towards increased health, wholeness, and resilience. Working with the people on creating elegant solutions carefully adapted to the biocultural uniqueness of the spaces they inhabit. It is predominantly local and regional in the sense that it works with both the regional and local culture and the limits and opportunities of regional and local ecosystems. It tries to meet the essential needs of local populations by creating vibrant regenerative business ecologies that link businesses in a collaborative endeavor to create, through local production or regional production for regional consumption, the fundamental needs of the local population. But it goes beyond that. Regenerative development in its most audacious is about redesigning the human presence on Earth, from being predominantly destructive and exploitative to being, by and large, regenerative, both socially, ecologically, and economically. This can be done through global collaboration and careful local and regional application. We can share knowledge from region to region. We need to understand that building a regenerative civilization is about helping everybody in their place to do their bit to create regenerative cultures that are carefully adapted to the biocultural uniqueness of the places they inhabit. So regenerative development is not something done by specialists. It is something that we need to bring into schools, into businesses, into public authorities everywhere in order to find a whole systems design approach to achieving Agenda 2030, implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, finding a transformative response to climate change, one example being the Regenerative Development to Reverse Climate Change initiatives of the Commonwealth. We are currently seeing a global revolution of the regeneration rising, of people working in agriculture, in economics, in city design and local community design on regenerative solutions. And we can learn from each other, always remembering that each of those solutions has to be unique to the place, and it has to come out of that place in work with the people of that place. In doing so, we will be able to create a world that is richer and more abundant, with healthier soils, healthier ecosystems, with a protection of biodiversity, and a strategy to not just combat climate change, as it is often called, but to actually go beyond it, to make an opportunity out of this global situation and bring carbon home, bring it back into the soil, bring it back into biomaterials, bring it back into standing forests, into healthy analog forests that provide the basis of our new circularly focused biomaterials economies. And it is also about healing the relationship between humanity and nature, understanding that we are fundamentally part of nature and depending on it. Taking a book out of the pages from biomimicry and understanding that as human beings, we have the capacity to create conditions conducive to life, that we can create richer and more abundant futures if we shift from a mindset that has us focused on competitive advantage and move towards a mindset that shows us that we can create collaborative abundance, not just for all of humanity, but for the community of life as a whole, that we can create a healthier and more productive planet. So I hope you join the regeneration. I'm excited about it. It's happening. It's our chance to respond to the converging crisis with a transformative innovation response.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, here we go.
All right. Sorry for the little technical issues, but hopefully it was...
I can't hear you now, Peter. Is your microphone plugged in?
My microphone is plugged in and it should be...
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. My bad.
Do you hear me now? Do you hear me now?
Oh boy. Yeah, keep going. That's fine now.
All right. You hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, let's move on. Hopefully it was inspiration. I want to go through a few principles and concepts of regenerative design a little bit more detail. But I'm staying in still on a high level on principles, philosophy, and beliefs, not really digging into underlying concepts in designs and so forth. There's just not the time doing so. A few of the principles which some people have been coming up over the years out of the experience is like the world is complex. Stop dumbing it down. That's something which unfortunately happens in a lot of places too often. And we can't go where we need to go by making compromises. And I will talk about that in a minute again. And important to understand, nature doesn't need our protection. She needs our collaboration. The only appropriate response is a local response. And that comes really back to that a lot of developments we see, cookie cutter developments, particularly in housing and so forth as well. And it's important to involve everyone, and there are many different ways that can be done really successfully, something which doesn't happen very well at the moment still. And we really have to evolve from harm reduction to create benefit, and benefit not only for us, for all of us, but of course for the natural systems as well. And using a whole systems approach, we've talked about that. And using place-based potential and not solving problems is a really shift in mindset. I was talking about that already before. And it takes a little bit of time really to get one's head around what that actually means. And also important not to neglect inner development work as well. How we are in this world is really important. So to talk, I've been talking about briefly about not trying to reach compromises. It sounds a bit weird because that's something which is done all the time in politics and everywhere else, but by using different approaches, how people really come together and how people really become more co-creative and co-generative together. I mean, how that is being done in practice is another part, of course, and don't have time to talk about that, but there are many different ways that can be done to really harmonize of what we are trying to achieve in a positive sense for our social systems and our natural systems as well. And I will show you some examples where that has been done really well. Sounds a bit, of course. But another part is, which is really important, I was talking about it already, to really think about not a place like a site you're trying to develop for housing or whatever it might be, but in its really its context and various levels of context we have to think about. It might be neighborhood context, it might be the town or city context, it might be the bioregional context, which comes back to the uniqueness of place. We really have to understand it in detail as well. And some people use the term the story of place, because every place is unique, has a cultural background, has a biophysical uniqueness, and particularly in places, I've been working a lot in Australia, of course, to the Aboriginal traditions which go back 60, 70,000 years, which nowadays is still very often not really being properly included and consulted at all. So really we have to, I think, put much more focus on that in order to start moving towards regeneration of places and environments and communities. Another way to look into that is really to ask pertinent questions, and Daniel Weil in his book is doing a really good job by asking high-level questions like what if and how do we choose regeneration over exploitation, and how can we thrive together rather than compete against each other? How can we create health, well-being, happiness and thriving communities? And how can we nurture human planetary health by redesigning our presence on Earth? I mean, these are high-level questions, but if you go to a site, these questions become much more specific to the place where you are in. And these questions can very often be a trigger to get many more people involved because they feel being heard. If you create people can be heard and they can make a meaningful contribution. And I really want to go into case studies now. Just very briefly, they are mostly provided by Regenesis Group, who have been working on that very, very long period of time. I would like to give an Australian example on there. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist yet, a regenerative example. However, it's slowly evolving in Australia as well, that more people are starting to move into the place. It's from Chile, on the west coast, on the coast of Chile, Pacific coast. Las Salinas is a city or part of a city, and it's just an aerial view of that. And we are looking at a small part of that city on the coast, and that place has been looking like this until maybe 10-12 years ago. There was a fuel terminal that has been abandoned and has been cleaned up by now, which is a very long process which takes a long time. However, it's now flagged for redevelopment, and you can see in the background here there are already some high-rise buildings as well, which, yeah, one can think about if that is really regenerative development or not. The interesting part of Las Salinas is actually it was developed about 100 years or so ago as a garden city. The garden city concept comes from Great Britain, which was done in the early 20th century. Were built some in the UK and also here in Chile. So it's a very green and livable city. However, development has taken over, has degraded the environment where just estuaries or streams were just being built over, just really faceless high-rise buildings, and of course problems going on in the bay, and related to the development also social problems as well. So really social disconnection. And the process Genesis was going through with stakeholders from the city and developers and many other people was to really create a different way how development is done, how people talk to each other. So a really deep engagement process was really the main thing they're trying to achieve. And I think it's a long-term process, was going over years. However, that graph maybe shows it best. At the beginning, most of the people were not really interested in the project or were really against it. And over the years, they really brought most of the people along the way that they're really enthusiastic about it. And that's really the important part, to really create that social environment of co-creation to make that happen. And I think one city councillor once said is they are so thankful in decades they are able to dream again for the city. So it's not about building some structures or so, but bringing together the people, social healing in some sense, you would say. It's for that project is just, of course, the starting point, but I want to give it as an example of how regenerative design and development can work by really bringing people together. And that very often works quite well because it's people's home and they make a contribution. It's their place. They are really concerned about, and if they have the possibility, a lot of people will actually come and also have a lot of knowledge about the place, which is important to understand it, to make development in a different way. Another example I want to move through very rapidly is based in Mexico, called Playa Viva. It's on the west coast of Mexico. It's about south to southwest of Mexico City on the Pacific coast as well. And that place is in a relatively rural area. And the development was about creating an eco resort near the beach. However, it was in the developers' interest to really develop the place not into an island of an eco resort where people have beautiful sustainable houses and sustainable food and so on, but really place it within the context of the place. And it was pretty clear very soon that the surrounding villages were dying and the young people were moving away because they didn't see an opportunity communities. The land was degraded by monoculture, previously for palm oil, which the industry collapsed at some stage. The shoreline and estuaries and creeks were overfished and heavily polluted through land degradation. And also they have habitat for sea turtles, which the population was declining very rapidly and diminishing to some extent because people were killing them, poaching them, and so forth for making a meager living in this area. However, soon they found out that actually this area was a very important trading post for the Aztec Empire. And so the land developer and owner of the land was really going into a deep engagement and journey with the whole of the community. So what he was trying to achieve with the community, the whole community, the whole region, back into life with small businesses, manufacturing, diversified ecological agriculture, to restore the ecological health of the environment and to create a vibrant community together with the development of the eco-resort. And that actually succeeded in the end. They were very successful, and that outlines the kind of thought process and ideas they were putting in. So really trying to do a holistic, whole systems kind of approach. And I mean, the resort exists and a number of people from the community working there, but not just that, but a lot of smaller businesses evolved within the community itself. They have restored a lot of the degraded lands, the estuaries, and also the turtle populations are coming back to the point that people who might have been involved in poaching them in the past are actually now the protectors of the turtles. So it's possible to heal a community, to heal the environment in the land as well. And the last example I want to briefly go through is in the United States, called the Brattleboro Food Cooperative. It's based in the state of Vermont, so on the east coast of the United States. And that food co-op was actually approaching the consultant first to build a sustainable supermarket. So build a sustainable building where they would have the supermarket and also the offices in there. However, by looking into that kind of issue a little bit more closely, they soon discovered that things are not really going that well for the whole of the community. All of the community was really reliant on food products coming from very far distances because local farmers were either going out of business or were really struggling to survive because of world market forces as well. So the lands were also degraded by use of many fertilizers and pesticides. So the whole community in relation to food supply was actually quite vulnerable, dependent on things coming from a far away place, which is of course not sustainable for many reasons. And the approach they were taking to change that around is not just building a sustainable building where they can house a supermarket, but really tackling the problems much deeper. And they suggested to create a credit union to financially support the farmers, create a biodynamic growing community and training program so that the farmers could work the land in a better way, in a more sustainable and hopefully regenerative way as well. And also some value-adding enterprises in the food space, like a cannery or an abattoir, but also covering the social space, for example, having an own childcare facility as part of the food co-op so that the people who were working there were able to take care of the children as well. And as part of it, of course, design the sustainable supermarket building as well. So it's really, it shows, it takes a systemic analysis of the issues and see the interconnectedness and where intervention points are possible to really create a systemic change in this about food supply systems and food selling systems as well. So it almost gets me to the end of the presentations. of the presentation, and I really would like to have a few final thoughts on that. Current tendency is very often to move very fast into projects and to try to address the challenges we face, to work on problems, as I've said before. But the problem is, if we move too fast into problems, aside from, of course, very often it's driven by finances, which is a problem by itself, we very often forget about the principles of regeneration. So some of the things I've been talking about now. So we need to learn how to slow down and to really reflect what matters to us in whatever role we are involved in a project, as a developer, as a landowner, as a consultant, as a city councillor or a planner, or as a local resident, or whoever it might be. So what is important to us individually as a group? And to really think about, where do we want to go? What is important to us? What do we value at a place and as a community? And it is important to apply ecological knowledge to create a fundamental redesign of our technologies and social institutions, so that we can bridge the gap between human design and the ecologically sustainable systems which we find in nature. So we need to develop an integral and regenerative project approach, and such projects are very often embedded in or oriented to influence the bigger context. So I've been talking about the wider systems we need to look at as well, which we not necessarily can change, but we really need to take them into account and maybe see some intervention points. So the focus should be, for any development, to have impact for change towards regeneration, and to cooperate with higher structures from the beginning onwards, I think, is very important as part of regenerative design. I think we're already short in time. I just want to show you, there's some slides there where I provide some additional resources which inform the presentations and books, and also some leads towards additional training and education. Of course, Gaia Education Design for Sustainability courses on top of that, but there are other groups who are providing education in that space as well, and these slides will be made available to you as well. So I would like to thank you for your time and attention, and hopefully it was of some value to you. You can always go back and re-listen to the presentation and use all the resources available. You can also ask questions now. You can stay in touch with me through email. I have a Facebook page, a blog page, and also a Medium page as well. So thanks very much for your attention, and handing back to you if there are any questions.
Oh, thanks a lot, Peter. This is really a very interesting topic and a very complex subject. As a matter of fact, you try to cover quite well, although there's so much material. I'm sure people will want to go back and dig a little deeper. And towards that end, I want to remind people that they will be contacted again with the link to the recording, but also we can provide the file that Peter used as a presentation, so you can look through it a little bit on your own pace, and maybe then follow the resources that Peter posted in his presentation. I would like to take a moment here to field some questions for Peter, and as I said before, the place to do that is the chat box that's at the bottom of your application. Peter, I have a question here already from Anthony. He says, do you think that regeneration is possible without a transformation of the human nature that has got us into this fix?
Very good question. My personal view is definitely, when it means what I mean with human nature, I don't necessarily use the term human nature, but I use more human consciousness. So how are we in the world, and how we relate to each other and relate to the natural world, which we are a part of or just a member of in a whole complex system of interaction. I am, you are, because otherwise it doesn't work. In that sense, yes, it has, our consciousness has to change. So that's why I was mentioning as well, it takes a lot of inner work and development as well to try to work in regenerative design and development, but eventually to work anywhere in the world on any kind of project or issue which tries to overcome the problems or crises, multiple crises we are facing at the moment. So yeah, very much so. Yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of a view.
Very good. Yeah, that's a tough question. I wonder if anybody else has a question. I don't see any at the moment in the chat box. Let's see. Yeah. No, I don't see anything in the chat box. I do have a question. Maybe you can clarify a little bit, Peter, is about the difference. I think you dealt with this a little bit at the beginning of your presentation, but the difference when people talk about regenerative development as opposed to sustainable development. Can you say a couple of things about that? Because I didn't quite catch the differentiation.
Yeah, I think there are various different aspects to the differences, but in general terms, sustainable development in conventional or almost mainstream terms is still thought about finding technological fixes to our problems, like creating more sustainable buildings, using renewable energy, using green products, using organically sourced kind of things we are using. The problem with that is kind of approaches, and there are many studies out there as well, it makes a very small difference in resource use. So if we go down a sustainability path in the way it's seen mostly, we are still relatively doomed. So in that sense, we need to move much further than sustainability. And that's where it comes from, because sustainability is not going to be enough. It's a little bit difficult to specify exactly what regeneration looks like, because, as I said, it's completely space specific or place specific where you are. But in a context, or in some way, it is about regenerating degraded environments into a probably not necessarily into a status how it was before, but that ecosystems can function properly and can sustain us and support us as humans, but also sustain a complex community of life which sustains us then anyway. So in an ecological sense, to bring back a lot of very highly degraded ecosystems, a lot of restoration work is part of regeneration as well. In the same sense, in a social sense, a lot of communities are degraded and non-functioning, and to find new ways how people can relate to each other in a different way. And that's what Gaia Education, particularly with the worldview and social perspective, is doing really great work and showing different ways how people can operate and work together in a more sustainable but really also regenerative way as well. So hopefully it goes there.
Good. I think several people were curious about that particular question.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Gordon. He says, do you think that education for sustainable development needs to be rather defined as a more focused context, in a more focused context, namely education for transformation, regeneration, resilience, etc.?
I definitely think so, and that's exactly what Gaia Education is doing in a lot of ways. And some of the regenerative kind of programs I was touching or just showing briefly are doing the same thing. So it has to be holistic, systems-based, doing inner work, doing outer work, doing all the social work as well, and doing ecological work as well, and pulling that together. And also the kind of SDG cards Gaia Education was developing as opposed to more conventional sustainable development work on SDGs and so, which is very often high level, government level and so forth, which is not very accessible for a lot of people. But if you use, for example, the flashcards, you can go into any kind of group and community and show people by asking right questions and bring them in, and actually they realize and they see, well, we within our community neighborhood have possibilities to actually do something, whatever works best for us. And I think that's really the important part, to go beyond, much beyond what conventionally sustainable development is thought of. Yeah.
Very good. There is a question from Petronella that actually addresses that in a different way. She asks, and there are a couple of other questions here, but the one that Petronella has is, can we start regenerative development without experiencing sustainability?
Without experiencing sustainability. Well,
is sustainability or resilience a precondition for regenerative development?
Well, no, I wouldn't say preconditions. I think that they will form part of it. And in the way I was really trying to explain that and showing the graphs, that you don't necessarily have to follow through in a linear kind of process. I mean, you can, if you're really well developed and really know the skills, you can head towards regeneration. And you will, in some sense, almost not necessarily by default, but in the way you operate and the way you think, you will create sustainability as part of it. So it's like that's what integral theory or holonomics or whatever you want to call it, you enfold sustainability and restoration part of regeneration. If you can step ahead over it, that's a good question. It's, yeah, well, the kind of judgment is out there, but I mean, all regenerative projects have sustainability as part of it, as an integral part of it, and restoration of ecosystems and so as part of it anyway. So it will come more or less as part of the whole package, I would say.
Okay. I'll take one more question here because we're almost out of time, but let me see. There's a question here from Elsa. I don't know if I understand it correctly, but she says, how to approach the follow-up and feedback collection for plans revision in such complex socio-ecological systems. I think she means, you know, how do we monitor it and how do we assess the system?
Well, yeah, that's a really difficult question to define what is success. I mean, of course, there are a lot of ways how to monitor natural systems, how they change, how they improve. For social systems, it starts getting already a bit trickier, and I'm not a social scientist, so forgive me if I don't really know too much about how you monitor it, but I believe I mean, you can use many surveys and statistics and many other kind of things. However, I mean, the issue, of course, is there are many things you can't really easily monitor. But very often the saying is, you can't manage what you can't monitor, but that's a bit of a false kind of idea, because many things like human relations, how good is the relation I have with you, Gio? I mean, how do you measure that? I mean, that's, you could do some things, but I think that's of course a difficulty, and that's maybe also with a scientific mind going into that is okay, but I think we have to open up our minds beyond science, and that's what Gaia Education does beautifully as well, and particularly Daniel Weil, who comes out of holistic science, a different approach to see the world as well, experiencing it more qualitatively, and also including our emotions, feelings, and other dimensions of our being and consciousness in there, which a lot can't be really measured. So I don't have a full and complete answer, but at least that's how far I can put it at the moment.
Very good. Well, I won't take any more questions now because we allowed it 1 hour for this webinar, and that time has run its course. But thank you again, Peter. This is very interesting, very fascinating, and of course, there's a lot more to look at to fully understand regenerative development. I do want to once again remind people that Gaia Education has other resources for learning about sustainable design, regeneration, and so on. We have a full curriculum that you can download for free. We also have activity guides for youth and for adults, and teacher guides that you can use if you want to run courses yourself. There are also good reading in the 4 keys books in each of the dimensions of our curriculum. And I want to mention again the Sustainable Development flashcards that Gaia Education has developed, along with a manual for using the flashcards to initiate conversations, meaningful conversations in our communities and organizations. Finally, for those who are interested in learning more, we have online courses that last from 2 months to a full year in both in 3 languages: English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And you can follow us on our social media if you would like to know more about Gaia Education's work. So thank you everybody very much for being here today. The recording will be available in the next couple of days, and so will the PDF of Peter's presentation. And thank you once again, Peter.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you.
Take care.
Goodbye. Thank you. Take care.